In the hallowed halls of science, ambition is the fuel that drives progress. It pushes the boundaries of human knowledge and unlocks the very secrets of life itself. But what happens when that fuel becomes an accelerant? What happens when the noble pursuit of discovery is corrupted by the raw, desperate hunger for personal glory? In today's story, we enter the pristine, controlled world of a cutting-edge biomedical research lab, a place where a genius was on the verge of changing the world. But within this temple of reason, a serpent was hiding in a lab coat, a trusted protege whose ambition had curdled into a deadly contagion. This is the story of a brilliant doctor, his devoted assistant, and a murder so cold and calculated it was almost mistaken for a tragic accident. The air, filtered and chilled to a precise temperature, smelled of nothing. The floors were polished white terrazzo, the walls were brushed aluminum, and the only sounds were the gentle hum of servers, the rhythmic clicks of robotic arms, and the hushed, reverent whispers of the brilliant minds who worked within. It was a cathedral dedicated to the new god of the 21st century, the genetic code, and its high priest was Dr. Alastair Finch. At 58, Dr. Finch was a titan in his field, a Nobel laureate at 45 for his early work in gene sequencing. He was a man whose intellect was matched only by his formidable, almost intimidating presence. He was tall and gaunt, with a shock of untamable white hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to look past you and into the very cellular structure of your being. He ran his institute not as a CEO, but as a feudal lord, his word absolute, his genius the unassailable law of the land. He was on the verge of his magnum opus, a project so secret and so revolutionary it was known only by its code name, Project Chimera. It was whispered among the senior staff that Chimera was the key to unlocking cellular regeneration, a practical end to aging. It was the kind of discovery that didn't just win another Nobel. It reshaped human history. Dr. Finch's right hand, his shadow, his most trusted acolyte, was Dr. Benjamin Carter. Ben Carter, at 32, was everything Alastair Finch was not. He was boyishly handsome, with a warm, easy smile and a calm, reassuring demeanor that could soothe frayed nerves and charm grant committees in equal measure. He had been recruited by Finch straight out of his doctoral program a decade ago, a prodigy handpicked by the master himself. Since then, his devotion had been absolute. He was the first to arrive in the morning and the last to leave at night. He managed the lab's day-to-day operations, co-authored Finch's papers, and served as the indispensable bridge between Finch's abstract genius and the practical, painstaking work of experimentation. Everyone at the Institute knew that without Ben Carter's tireless efforts, Finch's brilliance would have remained trapped in the labyrinth of his own mind. Their relationship was held up as a model of mentorship, the brilliant, demanding master and his loyal, brilliant protege. The day of the discovery began with a disruption to the lab's perfect, clockwork rhythm. Dr. Finch, a man of unyielding punctuality, missed the 9 a.m. senior staff briefing. It was unheard of. Ben Carter, looking genuinely concerned, informed the team that Finch had been working late the previous night, trying to overcome a final hurdle with the Chimera data. He was on the edge of something incredible, Ben had told them, his voice a mixture of awe and worry. He sent me home around midnight, said he just needed a few more hours of quiet to think. I'll check his office. But Finch wasn't in his office. He wasn't in the cafeteria or the library. A quiet, gnawing anxiety began to spread through the sterile halls. It was Ben who suggested they check the Sub-Zero Sample Storage Unit, Lab C4. It was a massive, walk-in cold room, chilled to a flesh-freezing -80 degrees Celsius, used for the long-term preservation of sensitive biological samples. It was also, as every scientist knew, a potential death trap. The room was purged with high-pressure nitrogen gas to eliminate oxygen and prevent sample degradation. Anyone trapped inside without a supplementary air supply would lose consciousness in under a minute and perish from asphyxiation shortly after. The heavy, insulated door to C4 was sealed shut. An electronic display above it glowed with a single, ominous word, purging. Ben's face went pale. He frantically punched his access code into the keypad. Access denied. He tried Finch's code, which he knew by heart. Access denied. The system must have locked down during a purge cycle, he yelled, his professional calm shattering. He's in there. Call security. Get the manual override key. What followed was 20 minutes of controlled chaos. Security arrived, alarms blared, and a senior engineer was summoned. The manual override, a complex procedure designed to prevent accidental depressurization, took agonizingly long. Finally, with a heavy hiss of escaping gas, the thick door swung open. A cloud of impossibly cold vapor billowed out into the hallway. And there, on the grated floor, amidst the towering stainless steel racks of frozen samples, lay the crumpled form of Dr. Alastair Finch. He was wearing his standard lab coat over his suit, his face peaceful, his skin a pale, waxy blue. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no violence. It was a silent, sterile, and horrifying scene. A tragic, textbook industrial accident. A moment of forgetfulness, a faulty sensor, a door that sealed too quickly, a genius lost to a simple, fatal mistake. The arrival of the police felt like an intrusion of a cruder, Messier reality into the pristine world of the Finch Institute. Detective Miles Harding was a homicide cop of the old school. He was a broad, rumpled man in his late 50s with a face that looked like it had lost a few arguments with gravity. He trusted his gut, and he had a deep-seated suspicion of places where there were no clear motives, no obvious passions, just cold, hard data. His partner, Detective Isabella Rossi, was his polar opposite. She was young, sharp, and fluent in the languages of both cops and code. She saw the world as a series of interconnected systems, and she knew that every system, no matter how perfect, had its glitches, its backdoors, its hidden logs. They were met by a devastated-looking Ben Carter and the Institute's stone-faced director. Ben, his voice trembling but clear, walked them through the accident. He explained the nitrogen purge system, the multi-layered safety protocols, and the infinitesimal odds of them all failing at once. Alastair was distracted. Ben explained, his eyes red-rimmed. He was closer than ever to the final breakthrough on Chimera. He could be absent-minded when he was deep in the data. He must have gone in to retrieve a sample, forgotten to sign out the oxygen tank, and the door's automatic timer engaged. The sensor on the door that's supposed to detect if someone is inside. It must have malfunctioned. He wouldn't have even realized what was happening until it was too late. It's a one-in-a-million tragedy. It was a plausible, heartbreaking narrative. Harding listened patiently, his gaze sweeping over the cold, emotionless laboratory. Everything was neat. Everything was in its place. Too neat. His gut, the finely tuned instrument he'd relied on for 30 years, was humming a low, discordant note. So the door just locks and fills the room with gas? Harding asked, his voice a skeptical growl. It's a security and preservation measure, Ben said, to prevent contamination and theft. The samples in here are priceless. Irreplaceable. More priceless than a man's life, apparently, Harding muttered under his breath. Rossi, meanwhile, was focused on the details. She noted the position of Dr. Finch's body, his hands empty. If he'd gone in to retrieve a sample, where was it? She looked at the door's electronic keypad. She saw the log of the failed entry attempts from Ben, but the log of the last successful entry was what interested her. It was time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The user ID belonged to Alastair Finch. According to the logs, Rossi said, pointing to the display, Dr. Finch entered the room at 11:47 p.m. The system shows the door sealing and the purge cycle beginning at 11:50 p.m. It all lines up. It seemed open and shut. A tragic accident, confirmed by the Institute's own high-tech security systems. The press was already spinning the narrative. Brilliant Nobel laureate dies in freak lab accident. But as the coroner's team carefully bagged the body, Rossi noticed something. On the floor, near the threshold of the massive door, almost hidden by the metal grating, was a small, dark scuff mark on the polished white floor. It was a black rubber mark, the kind a heavy object being dragged, not walked, might make. It was a tiny, insignificant detail, a single discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony of tragedy. She took a photo of it with her phone, her brow furrowed in thought. Harding and Rossi spent the rest of the day interviewing the shell-shocked staff. They heard the same stories over and over. Dr. Finch was a genius, a visionary, but he was also demanding, arrogant, and notoriously difficult to work for. He was a man who commanded immense respect, but very little affection. The only person who seemed to have his unwavering loyalty was Ben Carter. Ben was more than an assistant, one senior researcher told them. He was the Finch Whisperer. He translated Alistair's ravings into functional experiments. He put up with the tantrums, the 3 a.m. phone calls. Frankly, I don't know how he did it. The man is a saint. That night, as the media mourned the loss of a great mind, Harding and Rossi sat in their cramped office, the smell of stale coffee hanging in the air. It all seems a little too perfect, doesn't it? Harding said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. The brilliant but absent-minded professor, the 1 in a million malfunction. It feels like a story someone wrote. The data supports it for the most part, Rossi countered, though her voice lacked conviction. The logs, the system readouts, it's all consistent. Data can be manipulated, Harding grumbled. People lie. Machines lie if people tell them to. Just then, Rossi's phone buzzed. It was a preliminary report from the medical examiner. She read the email, her eyes widening slightly. She read it again. Marcus, she said, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the late-night quiet of the office. You're not going to believe this. Try me, he said. The ME found the cause of death. Asphyxiation due to nitrogen inhalation, just as we thought. But he also found something else in Dr. Finch's preliminary toxicology screen. A significant but non-lethal dose of a powerful benzodiazepine. A sedative. Harding sat bolt upright, his chair groaning in protest. You're telling me he was drugged? He was, Rossi confirmed, her mind racing, connecting the dots. The sedative. The peaceful look on Finch's face. The scuff mark on the floor. He wasn't absent-minded, Marcus. He was incapacitated. He didn't walk into that cold room. He was dragged. The silent, sterile, tragic accident at the Finch Institute had just become a cold, calculated, and deeply personal murder. And the devoted, grieving assistant who had so perfectly explained the tragedy was now their number one suspect. The confirmation that Dr. Alistair Finch had been drugged before his death transformed the investigation from a procedural review into a covert manhunt. The sleek, glass walls of the Finch Institute, once a symbol of scientific transparency, now seemed to hide a labyrinth of secrets. Harding and Rossi returned the next day not as observers of a tragedy, but as hunters. The atmosphere had shifted. The initial shock and grief among the staff had curdled into a palpable paranoia. Whispers replaced the usual academic discourse in the hallways, and every scientist, postdoc, and lab tech now looked at each other with a flicker of suspicion. Their primary target was Dr. Benjamin Carter, but they knew they had to move with surgical precision. Ben was brilliant, composed, and held in high esteem by everyone at the Institute. A direct accusation without overwhelming evidence would be professional suicide and would give their suspect time to bury any remaining clues. They decided on a two-pronged attack. Harding would handle the human element, digging into the lives and relationships within the lab, while Rossi would descend into the Institute's digital soul, looking for the ghost in the machine. Harding's first stop was a second, more in-depth interview with the Institute's director, a corporate man named Dr. Miles Kendrick. This time, Harding didn't ask about the accident. He asked about the science. Project Chimera. Harding began, his pen poised. Dr. Carter mentioned it. What is it, exactly? Kendrick's face, usually a mask of boardroom composure, tightened. That research is the single most valuable piece of intellectual property this institute has ever produced. It is, to put it simply, a gene-editing therapy designed to target and reverse the process of cellular senescence. It stops aging. In early trials, it has even reversed it. It's the fountain of youth, detective, delivered through a syringe. The patents, once filed, will be worth not millions, but hundreds of billions of dollars. The motive, which had been a vague cloud of professional jealousy, now solidified into a mountain of pure, solid gold. This wasn't just about getting credit for a discovery. It was about controlling a technology that would fundamentally change the world and make its owner wealthier than a king. Who had access to the full Chimera data? Harding asked. In its complete, unredacted form? Only two people, Kendrick said, his voice grim, Alastair Finch, and his protege, Ben Carter. Harding's next series of interviews were with the other scientists on the Chimera team. He painted Ben Carter as the grieving hero, the man holding the project together after his mentor's tragic death, and watched their reactions. While most praised Ben's dedication, a few, under Harding's practiced, gentle probing, revealed hairline cracks in the perfect facade. A young, ambitious postdoctoral researcher named Dr. Lena Petrova was particularly insightful. Everyone thinks Ben is a saint, she told Harding in the hushed confidence of an empty conference room. And he is, in a way. He's a brilliant scientist. But he's also a ghost. He did the work, all of it. The late nights, the failed experiments, the painstaking data analysis. Alastair would have a flash of inspiration, a theoretical leap, and Ben would spend the next 6 months in the lab making it a reality. But when it came time to present at a conference or publish a paper, it was always Finch. Ben was a footnote. We thank Dr. Carter for his technical assistance. It was a joke. Did that bother him? Harding asked. He never showed it, Petrova admitted. He was always the loyal soldier. But how could it not? Imagine solving the world's biggest problem and knowing that the history books would give all the credit to the man who just pointed you in the right direction. Ben was a coiled spring. I always felt that one day he was going to snap. While Harding was mapping the emotional currents of the lab, Rossi was engaged in a silent, invisible war. She had obtained a warrant for full access to the Finch Institute servers, a digital fortress of immense complexity. For 2 days, she barely moved from her desk, her world shrinking to the glow of her dual monitors, fueled by coffee and a burning intensity. She was hunting for a single, erased footprint in a digital wilderness. She started with the access logs for the C4 cold room. The system showed, as she'd seen before, that Finch's ID had been used to open the door at 11:47 p.m. But Rossi went deeper, pulling the raw system logs from the server's core, the records that weren't meant for the user-friendly interface. There she found it. A single line of code, executed at 11:46 p.m., just 1 minute before the door was opened. It was a command that had originated not from the keypad at the C4 door, but from a secondary maintenance terminal located in a small, rarely used utility closet on the other side of the building. The command was a temporary ID clone, which made any access card swiped at the C4 terminal for the next 5 minutes register as Dr. Finch's. Someone had created a digital ghost. The next step was to check the security footage for the utility closet. The camera, of course, had been disabled. The logs showed a power fluctuation that had knocked it offline for a 10-minute period between 11:40 and 11:50 p.m. The killer was good. He was meticulous. He knew the systems inside and out. Rossi moved on to the Holy Grail, the Chimera data itself. It was stored on an air-gapped, hyper-encrypted server known as the Vault. Access was a 3-factor authentication process that required a keycard, a biometric scan, and a dynamic password. The logs for the Vault were predictably pristine. But Rossi wasn't looking at who was getting in. She was looking at the data itself. She ran a deep-level forensic analysis not on the files, but on the empty space on the server. She was looking for the digital echoes of deleted files. After hours of painstaking work, her program flagged something. A massive data packet, over a terabyte in size, had been deleted from the Vault 2 nights before Finch's murder. It had been wiped clean using a sophisticated, multipass algorithm designed to make recovery impossible. But the algorithm wasn't perfect. It had left behind a ghost, a tiny, fragmented header file. And in that header, Rossi found a string of characters that made her blood run cold. It was the routing information for a transfer protocol. The data hadn't just been deleted. It had been copied, and the destination was a portable, encrypted solid-state drive. The final piece of the digital puzzle was Finch's personal computer. His email archives were a testament to his single-minded focus. Dense correspondence with other academics, grant proposals, journal submissions. But in his deleted items folder, Rossi found a series of email drafts, written over the course of the last month. They were addressed to Ben Carter. The tone was uncharacteristically cold and formal. The first draft read, "Ben, we need to discuss discrepancies I found in the Chimera raw data logs. There appear to be unauthorized access events." A week later, a second draft, "Ben, my inquiries have been met with evasion. I am initiating a full data audit. I expect your complete cooperation." The final draft, written on the afternoon of his murder, was chilling. "Benjamin, I know what you have done. You have betrayed me and this entire institute. We will meet in my office tonight at 11:30. Do not be late." The emails had never been sent. Finch, it seemed, had decided to confront his protégé in person. It was a confrontation he would not survive. Harding, in the meantime, had been digging into Ben Carter's life outside the lab. On the surface, it was unremarkable. He lived in a modest apartment, drove a sensible car, and had no apparent vices. But a financial background check revealed a different story. Ben was drowning in debt, not from gambling or an extravagant lifestyle, but from his past. He had put himself through an elite undergraduate program and his PhD at MIT on a mountain of private student loans. On top of that, he was the sole financial support for his ailing mother, who required round-the-clock nursing care. Despite his prestigious position, his salary was barely enough to keep his head above water. He was a man under immense, invisible pressure. Harding's final interview was a stroke of luck, a conversation with a night shift janitor who had been in the building on the night of the murder. The man, initially hesitant to talk, remembered seeing Dr. Finch and Ben Carter engaged in a heated argument outside Finch's office late that night. "I couldn't hear what they were saying," the janitor said, "but it was bad. Dr. Finch, he was waving this little black thing in Dr. Carter's face. Looked like one of them little computer hard drives. Dr. Carter, he looked like a trapped animal. I've never seen him like that. He's always so calm, you know?" Harding and Rossi convened back in their office, the web of evidence now drawn tight. "So here's our story," Harding said, pacing in front of the whiteboard where they'd mapped out the case. "Finch discovers that his golden boy, Ben, has copied the multi-billion-dollar Chimera research onto a portable drive, probably to sell to the highest bidder. He confronts Ben, who knows he's cornered. His career is over, and he's facing prison time. So Ben enacts a plan he's clearly been thinking about for a while," Rossi continued, picking up the thread. "He agrees to the meeting. He gets Finch a coffee, laced with a sedative. Once Finch is groggy and disoriented, Ben overpowers him. He drags him to the utility closet, uses the maintenance terminal to clone Finch's ID, then drags him the rest of the way to the C4 lab. He uses his own card, which registers as Finch's, to open the door," Harding concluded. "He pushes the unconscious Dr. Finch inside, seals the door, manually triggers the purge cycle, and walks away. Then he goes home and waits for the tragic discovery the next morning. It's cold, it's brilliant, and it's almost the perfect crime. They had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. They had the digital ghost and the real-world corroboration. The coiled spring that was Dr. Benjamin Carter had finally snapped, with devastating and murderous force. All that was left was the confrontation. The arrest was not going to be a simple affair. Ben Carter was not a common criminal who would be intimidated by a badge and a pair of handcuffs. He was a genius, a man who had orchestrated a near-perfect murder, and his greatest weapon was his intellect and his unassailable composure. Harding and Rossi knew that to break him, they couldn't just present the evidence. They had to dismantle his reality, to deconstruct the very foundation of superiority upon which he had built his crime. They decided to bring him into the precinct, into their world, a place where his PhD and his reputation meant nothing. The call was a simple request for a follow-up interview to clarify some inconsistencies in the lab's security logs. Ben agreed without hesitation, his voice on the phone the epitome of calm cooperation. He arrived at the station looking exactly as he always did, dressed in a smart, understated suit, his expression one of somber helpfulness. He walked into the stark, gray interrogation room and sat down, folding his hands on the metal table, looking more like a consultant than a murder suspect. "Detectives," he began, his tone even. "How can I help you clear this up? The sooner we can put the questions around Alistair's accident to rest, the sooner the Institute can get back to its important work." Harding started, his approach deliberately folksy and non-threatening. "We're just having a little trouble with these security systems of yours. Document real high-tech stuff. We just want to walk through the timeline of that night one more time." For 20 minutes, Harding had Ben recount his version of events, a story Ben had clearly rehearsed to perfection. He spoke of his concern for Finch, his last conversation with him, his devastating discovery the next morning. He was patient, articulate, and empathetic. It was a flawless performance. Then Rossi took over. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a printout of the core system log from the C4 lab. "The system shows Dr. Finch's ID was used to open the door at 11:47 p.m., she said, her voice cool and precise. "But 1 minute earlier, at 11:46, a command was executed from a maintenance terminal in a utility closet on the other side of the building. The command was ID_Finch. It made your keycard register as Dr. Finch's for 5 minutes. The camera for that closet, coincidentally, was offline. Can you explain that?" For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through Ben's calm eyes, a micro-expression of surprise, quickly suppressed. "That's highly unusual," he said, his brow furrowing in a convincing display of confusion. "It must be a system glitch. Or perhaps a hacker. We've been worried about corporate espionage." "A very specific glitch," Rossi countered, pushing a second folder onto the table. "This one contains the recovered data fragments from the Vault server. It shows a terabyte of data. The complete Chimera project was copied to an external drive 2 days before the murder. And this," she added, sliding a bank statement next to it, "shows a $5,000 cash purchase of an encrypted, military-grade solid-state drive the week before. A drive you paid for with your personal debit card." Ben stared at the papers, his jaw tightening. The mask of calm cooperation was beginning to crack. "That was for a personal data backup," he said, his voice a little too sharp. "I work with sensitive data all day. I'm security conscious." "I'm sure you are," Harding rumbled, leaning forward, his large frame crowding the table. "Is that why you were arguing with Dr. Finch outside his office on the night you killed him? Our witness said he was waving a small, black hard drive in your face. I'm guessing it was the one you just mentioned." Ben's composure finally shattered. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is insane. A janitor's misinterpretation? A system glitch? This is circumstantial nonsense. You have nothing." "We have this," Rossi said quietly, placing a final piece of paper on the table. It was the toxicology report. Alistair Finch had 150 nanograms per milliliter of lorazepam in his system. He was drugged, Ben. He didn't walk into that cold room. And we found trace residue of the same sedative in the coffee mug on his desk, the one you so kindly brought him during your final conversation. Silence. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. Ben stood there, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked from the report to Rossi's calm, unblinking eyes, then to Harding's grim, knowing stare. The intellectual arguments, the plausible denials, the entire intricate web of lies, had been burned away. He was caught. He slowly sank back into his chair. But he did not break down. He did not cry or confess in a fit of remorse. Instead, a slow, chilling smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated arrogance. The performance was over, and the true artist was finally taking his bow. "You have no idea, do you?" he said, his voice a low, contemptuous whisper. You see all this data, all these little clues, but you don't see the truth. The beautiful, simple truth. The interrogation room had become his stage. This was his justification, his manifesto. Alistair Finch hadn't had an original idea in 20 years. Ben began, his voice filled with a lifetime of suppressed rage and intellectual condescension. He was a figurehead, a brand, a relic who won a Nobel Prize for work he did before I was born and had been dining out on it ever since. He would wander into the lab, spout some vague, poetic nonsense about listening to the cells, and then disappear to a conference in Geneva, leaving me to do the actual work. Project Chimera wasn't his, he spat, his fist clenching on the table. It was mine. I discovered the CRISPR vector. I wrote the delivery algorithm. I spent 10 years, 80 hours a week, staring into microscopes and running simulations until my eyes bled. I built that cathedral brick by painstaking brick. And he was going to put his name on the spire and call it his own. He described the confrontation. Finch had found the drive, just as the janitor had said. He had threatened to ruin Ben, to have him arrested for corporate espionage, to blacklist him from the scientific community forever. He called me a thief, Ben said with a hollow laugh. He stood there in front of my life's work and called me a thief. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. In that moment, I realized he wasn't a mentor. He was a parasite, and the only way to save the research, to save my life's work from his ego, was to remove him. It wasn't murder, detective. It was a necessary excision. A peer review of one. He recounted the crime with a terrifying, detached pride. The sedative in the coffee was simple. Overpowering the groggy old man was even simpler. He described the cold, hard logic of his plan, using the maintenance terminal, faking the logs, the precise timing. He had thought of everything. The only mistake I made, he said, looking at Rossi with a flicker of genuine respect, was underestimating the forensic accounting of the digital world. I was so focused on the physical evidence, I neglected the ghosts. A fatal flaw in my experimental design. There was no remorse in his voice, no guilt. Only the profound, unshakable conviction of a man who believed his own genius gave him the right to decide who lived and who died, who was remembered by history and who was erased. It was not ambition that had driven him to kill. It was a God complex, born in the sterile, quiet rooms of a laboratory where he had come to believe that he, and he alone, had mastered the secrets of life itself. Ben Carter was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The news of the murder, and its motive, sent shockwaves through the scientific community. A dark cautionary tale about the pressures and temptations that lie beneath the noble pursuit of knowledge. Project Chimera, the revolutionary research that could have changed the world, was impounded as evidence. Its future became entangled in a web of legal battles between the Institute, Finch's estate, and the pharmaceutical companies that had been secretly courting Ben Carter. Its potential to heal, to end suffering, was tainted by the blood and ambition from which it was born. Sitting in their office late one night after the trial, Harding looked at the closed case file on his desk. You know, he said to Rossi, for a guy that smart, he was a real dummy. He could have had it all eventually. The fame, the money. He just couldn't wait. Rossi stared out the window at the city lights. That's the thing about ambition like his, she said quietly. It's not about eventually. It's about now. He didn't just want to be a god in the future. He believed he already was.